Groh is the new offensive coordinator for the Eagles. He gets the job over Duce Staley, Pete Thompson, and some people, what's the ripple effect of this? Duce was a pretty popular guy inside that locker room, and he's been here longer than Mike Groh, who was brought over from the Bears as a wide receiver, or the Rams. He was with the Bears and then the Rams as a wide receiver coach. We're here to make some sense of it all. We'll talk some Eagles and NFL with John McMullen here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. And the Eagles make their decision. It's not like a crazy decision, but they did maybe, I don't want to say ruffled some feathers here, but they went with the guy who has not been in the organization as long as Duce Staley by picking Mike Groh there, John.
Yeah, I think it's going to create more waves outside of Philadelphia than inside of Philadelphia because I think people here kind of know how Doug Peterson does his business, and it's not about anything other than picking what he thinks is the best guy for the job. Unfortunately, we all know that the NFL has had a problem with diversity and high-profile coaching positions, and Roger Goodell spoke about it at the Super Bowl. They need more African Americans in the pipeline, and you start to ask yourself, well, if Duce Staley gets passed over for Mike Groh, Duce has been here obviously as a player, we all know that, but as a coach since 2011, for Mike Groh has been here for 1 year, and even somebody like that can't get an opportunity. Who's going to get an opportunity? So I think that's the kind of issue they're going to face on a national scale.
Yeah, on the surface here, how much changes because of this move? Anything at all?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think Frank Reich was a lot more important than people think or people understand. And Doug kind of admitted that when he was on Mike Krzyzewski's show earlier this month. And he admitted, look, the head coach has a lot to do during the week. And Frank was pretty much responsible for putting together the game plan. So while Doug was calling the plays, Frank was doing a lot of the heavy lifting during the week. Now that obviously turns towards Mike Groh, who hasn't done it at this level before. He was a coordinator with his father at Virginia for a little while, but this is a whole different ball game. I think this is something you have to keep an eye on because this is an inexperienced guy stepping up for an experienced guy. And so there's probably going to be some growing pains.
John, how much do you think it factored in the background or what the coach, the two different candidates were strong at? Because Mike Groh, of course, strong at the quarterbacks, receivers, turned around Nelson Aguilar, previously an offensive coordinator, like you said. Duce Staley's entire resume and work has been with the running backs.
Yeah, that's all of it. And that's why he got the job. And I've been hinting at it with you guys for a number of weeks. I mean, this is what I expected to happen. After John got the job with the Vikings, John DeFilippo, ultimately I thought Mike Groh was going to be elevated to the offensive coordinator. He just has the kind of resume for that. It's very difficult to take the step from running backs coach to coordinator in this league. It doesn't happen very often. You look at all the coordinator jobs right now, only one did that, and that's Eric Bieniemy in Kansas City, who just got that job. So it kind of tells you have to coach quarterbacks. You have to be a coordinator at the college level, something of that nature. Mike has that. Duce did not. But if anybody was going to get a shot anywhere, it was going to be Duce Staley in Philadelphia, and that's why I think there's going to be a lot of disappointment for people pushing for more diversity in the NFL coaching ranks.
How do you think that conversation goes today between Peterson and Duce Staley when Duce learns that he's bypassed? I mean, is that Doug's biggest job right now, to massage over the hurt feelings?
Yeah, it might be. We're going to have to see how Duce takes it. I mean, he's under contract, but he's only under contract for 1 more year. So ultimately, he may try to decide that he has to leave this organization if he wants to take the next step or try to go coach a different position at a different team. This very well could set him in a different direction in his career depending how he feels and how he wants to handle it.
You know, that's interesting because, Duce has been a player here. He's now been a coach here. And you wonder if he's at that point right now where he says, like, this is as far as I can get here. And you're right, he might have to leave. But do you think that overall that the Eagles made the right decision here? Sometimes making the right choice is very difficult. You know, they could have easily just said, all right, let's go with Duce. He's been here for so long. But do you think that Mike Groh was the right choice?
I do. I think it was the right choice for all the reasons I said. His resume is far more varied. He's done more things in his career, not here, but in other places. And the fact that he used to play the quarterback position, just as Doug did in the college level. Obviously, Doug played in the pros for a long time. These are where coordinators generally come from. And the fact that he's coached quarterbacks in the past, he's been a coordinator. All of these things are bullet points you're usually looking for when you're making the next step in hiring a first-time coordinator. That's just the way it's been in this league. I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. So if you looked at the body of work, Mike's was stronger than Duce's as far as getting to this position.
The one thing's interesting, too, was you got a lot of wide receivers that were saying how, Mike was very good. You got a lot of running backs. In fact, LeGarrette Blount came out and said that Duce was one of the best coaches he ever played for.
And former running backs, LaShawn McCoy, using Twitter to lobby for Duce.
Yeah, hey, Duce Staley has a ton of respect in that locker room, certainly among that position group. The guys love him, and he did a wonderful job in a very difficult circumstance because running back is a position where you generally have a bunch of guys who want the football, and people don't like being part of the committee. So the fact that he managed those guys so well and had them all on the same page, and you didn't have problems even when Jay Ajayi got here, tells you a lot about the way he handled personalities. And that was one of sort of those off the beaten path type of things that you thought might get Duce some points as far as trying to get it, because managing personalities is a big part of being a coach in this league. But you could say the same thing about Mike Groh. It completely turned around what was arguably the worst receiving group in the NFL in 2016. And all of a sudden in 2017, they weren't great, but they were darn good. And you see the improvement of Nelson Aguilar. That's going to be a headline because he looked like a terrible football player before Mike got here. And all of a sudden, he turns into an impactful one. Now, Nelson deserves a lot of credit because he did a lot of work with Rydell Anthony, who runs a sort of a receiving school in the offseason. So he deserves a lot of credit for getting better himself. But there's no doubt that Mike did a very good job with that group as well.
Speaking of one LeGarrette Blount, LeGarrette sounds like he's a guy that would like to be back in Philadelphia, John. What are the possibilities of that happening?
Well, I think it's a possibility because you just look at last year. I mean, last year, LeGarrette was coming off an 18-touchdown season, and he couldn't get paid. And this time around, he was very effective in that committee role. He led the Eagles in rushing. He was the top rusher in the Super Bowl. And he accepted his role as a situational player. So the reality is, as a 31-year-old running back who's going to turn 32, I think, in December, he's not going to break the bank. So if he would be willing to come back for another one-year deal at a similar price as he played this season, I think it's a possibility because you have to have some concern over the fact that Jay Ajayi's got the chronic knee issue, and there's no guarantee Corey Clement's going to be able to handle an expanded role. He was very effective in limited touches, but all of a sudden, if you want to increase that, there's no guarantee he's going to give you what LeGarrette Blount did. So I think it's a definite possibility, but we'll see how it shakes out because there's other names. Is Darren Sproles going to come back? Is Donnell Pumphrey ready to contribute? So all of that is going to enter the mix as well.
Some reports out there, too, that Torrey Smith also would like to come back to Philadelphia. How likely is that possibility?
Well, that's less likely. He's got obviously signed a 3-year deal, but it was essentially a 1-year deal in the fact the Eagles can get out of it with no salary cap penalty whatsoever. And his number is $5 million for next year. So there's no way the Eagles are going to pay him $5 million for the contributions he made this year, even though he stepped up and he made big plays in the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl. He just was not effective during the regular season. You want to improve at that position, and you're certainly not going to pay him $5 million. So maybe if Torrey wants to renegotiate for a 1-year deal at the veteran minimum, maybe they bring him back, but I think they're certainly going to look to improve at that position.
And one guy on the other side of the ball, John, that it looks like the Eagles are not having in their future plans is Jalen Watkins. So what's the latest on him?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, he's scheduled to be a restricted free agent. There's a report today from Ian Rappaport that the Eagles are not going to tender him, which would make him unrestricted and he can go anywhere. But that's about they don't want to give him his original round tender. They could bring him back at a lesser price, and there's a possibility, but it would still be obviously as a deep reserve. I don't think the Eagles see him as a fit for being a consistent part of the defense, but they know him. He's a very versatile player, so he could be back at a lesser number. It depends how much interest he gets around the league and free agency.
How much of Howie Roseman's time right now do you think is spent trying to massage numbers and going over contracts and stuff?
All of it. I mean, as it stands right now, the Eagles, the projected salary cap, it's not set, but what everybody thinks it's going to be around, they're going to be $9.5 million over the cap before they do anything. So obviously that's not tenable. You got to sign your draft class. You want to bring in at least some targeted free agent signings. So they have a lot of work to do as far as either releasing players, restructuring contracts, making decisions. But that's Howie's wheelhouse. He'll get it done. He always does. We seemingly talk about this every year, and everybody's concerned. The Cleveland Browns have $100 million to spend, and the Eagles have -$9 million, and it looks like you can't do anything. But he'll figure out a way. He always does.
So, by the way, Duce Staley will remain with the Eagles. Press Taylor is the new quarterback coach. Staley, the running back coach. Mike Groh, the offensive coordinator. Okay. So that is your new setup inside the Eagles' offensive, war room there, if you will. The Eagles deciding to promote Mike Groh to offensive coordinator today. So really, Groh is elevated from wide receiver coach to coordinator, and Press Taylor is the new wide receiver coach. So there you go. Actually, the new quarterback, new quarterback coach.
It's going to be the quarterback coach. They need a receiver coach. Find a receivers coach. So
is Greg Lewis hanging around anywhere?
They're going to bring him back.
He's probably in the Eagles media relations office. That's an inside joke. People will get that, isn't it?
Hey, John, this is a little bit off the beaten path, but how about the fact that the Eagles are trying to trademark that phrase Philly special and that they're not even first in line for trying to trademark it?
Yeah, well, people are it's interesting because obviously people take advantage of those types of situations. So you got to jump on it very quickly if you want to sell merchandise and that kind of thing. And the Eagles will get it, I imagine, the trademark. So, it's not that important, obviously, but people will certainly buy T-shirts of the play. You've already seen people get tattoos.
Right, with the wrong play.
Of the plays. Yeah, the wrong play. Yeah, you should. If you're going to get the tattoo, you better make sure you got the alignment correct.
Yeah, and
don't show Alshon Jeffrey off the line of scrimmage.
There's also isn't there like a surge in tattoos around the area?
Yeah, there is. Everybody's getting Nick Foles tattoos and Philly special tattoos, and hey, it's been a long time. Obviously, people have been waiting for this for a very long time. I think you're going to see a lot of Nick babies as well, maybe even some Carson babies thrown in there. So you always have that excitement when your team wins the Super Bowl.
You know, I know yesterday a lot of people were talking about Bill Polian's comments that, the Eagles, they should get 2 1s and a 2 2s to get Nick Foles, which a lot of people kind of laughed out of the room. But, today –
as I'm doing. Right
today he was on and he said something that kind of, perked my ears up. He said, you got to watch what you do with this guy. This guy's an icon in your town. And when you put it that way, is he right about that?
He is right about that. That's and I mentioned that on the show a couple weeks ago. That's the bigger problem. I mean, this guy got the Eagles and the Eagles fans that we're just talking about and all the tattoos and all the T-shirts and all the merchandise. He got this town what it's been waiting for 52 years and really longer than that, going back to 1960. Nick Foles put him over the top. So he'll always be sort of a folk hero in Philadelphia, and that's the bigger concern. Obviously, from a football standpoint, it's easy. Carson Wentz is a better quarterback. When he's healthy, you get the most value you possibly can out of a player who essentially is going to be a free agent after next season. And if you can get a first-round pick, you just mentioned Bill Polian talking about 2 number 1s, 2 number 2s. We've heard Peter King say 2 number 1s. All these ridiculous the value has never been higher. So from a football standpoint, it's easy. If you're Howie Roseman, you just play it up and try to get the most value you potentially can, and move forward with Nate Sudfeld and bring in somebody else as a potential backup. But from the other part, it's not as easy as doing that. When you have success, and I always point to the New York Yankees and Derek Jeter. Derek Jeter wasn't a very good baseball player at the end of his career. But what do you do if you're the New York Yankees? What he meant to that organization, that city, you almost had to let him retire on his own terms. That's what they did. Now, Nick's not at that level, obviously. You're talking about a Hall of Fame player. But it's some of the similar circumstances as far as the attitude of the city and what they have for Nick Foles. He's a hero. So that part of it is more difficult than the football part of it. The football part of it's easy.
John, you talk about Nick Foles and his value never being higher. Doug Peterson, you could probably say the same thing about, that his value's never been higher. And, I couldn't help but stop on the 2 Bills again last night, that documentary about Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells. And I happened with great interest to watch the specific part where Parcells was saying, I'd like to have some decision on the groceries that go into it. And Robert Kraft came back and said, I think we have good groceries. They're fresh. It makes me think about Doug Peterson hasn't made any inkling like he wants a role in talent evaluation, right?
Not to this point. And look, I think Doug is smart enough to realize how well this worked. And I think this is the best setup. I think coaches get in trouble when they push for that kind of power, simply because there's not enough time in the day to do all the jobs. And even guys who have the power, like Bill Belichick, it's a little bit overblown. And the fact, yes, they have a final decision, and if it comes down to that, they can put their foot down on any potential personnel move. But it's not like Bill Belichick doesn't have scouts and people doing the heavy lifting for him. It's just about trusting and working together. So who's in charge is more about semantics. Essentially, the Eagles have done this time. They got it wrong during the Chip Kelly regime. Now they have it right. The offseason is for the GM. He builds the 90-man roster. Then you give that 90-man roster to the coach. The coach is in charge from that point. And I like the coach to have the final say on the 53. That's not the case here, but it's not a big deal because you're talking about maybe the final 1 or 2 players on the roster. And that's how it should work. You can't do both jobs. So it's really all about semantics. And even the ones that do have the power, as I mentioned, they hire people they trust to do the job, to do the heavy lifting, to do the scouting, to build the draft board, and then they make the decision. So it's not really all that different. And it generally comes down when you have issues like you did with Chip Kelly and Howie, it all comes down to ego more than anything else.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Couple quick NFL news and notes. The Doug Martin released today by the Buccaneers, so you got a pretty high-profile running back that's going to hit the market out there. You think there'll be a big bunch of teams lining up for his services?
No, he'll have no problem getting a job, but we've seen the running back market as a whole. It just doesn't exist anymore when you get to free agency, and I don't think he's going to get a giant contract or anything of that nature. That's just the reality of the NFL today. And Martin's been one of those guys. He sort of has one big year sort of every 3 years or so. So there's no consistency there. There's an injury history, suspension history. But he can certainly play in this league. But if you're looking for a high-profile name, big contract, that's just not what happens at the running back position, kind of what I talked about with LeGarrette coming off an 18-touchdown season. That got him, a little over $1 million.
A lot of eyes will be on Kirk Cousins today. The Redskins, it's the first day you can tag. Nothing's happened yet, but I guess he would be, one of the higher profile guys to keep an eye on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and rightfully so. He's a very good quarterback, and very good quarterbacks generally don't get to free agency. It's very rare, and we all know sort of the trials and tribulations of the Redskins, and that was how that was handled very poorly from the start. The talk in New York that the Jets are going to offer him $60 million guaranteed up front. So he's going to get paid. It's just a matter of where he wants to go. It could be the Jets, the Browns, the Broncos. Even if he wants to take less money, the Vikings. I think a lot of it depends on Kirk and what he wants. Mm-hmm. He's already made a ton of money because he was franchised the last 2 years. If he wants to go win at a high level, he's going to go to Denver or Minnesota. If he wants the most money, he's probably going to go to the Jets.
That Minnesota thing's really interesting. That's a team that's a ready-made team, but they have no quarterback. So that'll be one to keep an eye on there. Obviously, 3 quarterbacks on their roster last year, none on their current roster right now. So something to keep an eye on. A lot of NFL news and notes will continue on here this offseason with John McMullen here on 97.3 ESPN, 97.3ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. All right, pal.
All right, thanks, guys.